Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. Today we're stepping away from daily price movements and short-term headlines and slowing this right down. Because to understand crypto properly, you have to understand why Ethereum exists at all. Not why it's popular, not why it's traded, and not how it performs in any given cycle, but why it was created in the first place, how it was designed, and why it could only have come after Bitcoin, not before. To tell that story properly, we need to go back to the world before Ethereum was even a concept. When Bitcoin launched in 2009, it wasn't trying to build a new financial system in the broad sense people talk about today. It was solving one specific, narrowly defined problem: how to create digital money that did not rely on trust in governments, banks, or central intermediaries. Bitcoin was designed to be scarce, verifiable, censorship-resistant, and predictable. That was the mission. Everything else was secondary. And that narrow focus was intentional. Bitcoin's scripting language was deliberately limited. It wasn't built to support complex logic or broad programmability, because complexity increases attack surface. Every additional feature introduces new failure modes. Bitcoin's creator understood that if the system was going to survive, it had to be simple enough to secure, stable enough to trust, and boring enough to leave alone. For several years, Bitcoin stood largely on its own. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. It survived technical challenges, ideological splits, regulatory pressure, exchange failures, and repeated claims that it was dead. It created miners, wallets, exchanges, payment rails, and a global user base from nothing. Most importantly, it proved that decentralized consensus could work at scale without a central authority. That proof mattered more than anything else. But as Bitcoin matured, a new question began to emerge. If a decentralized network could securely coordinate money, what else could it coordinate? Developers began experimenting at the edges. Some tried to extend Bitcoin's scripting capabilities. Others launched alternative chains to explore features Bitcoin deliberately avoided: faster block times, privacy enhancements, governance mechanisms, or more expressive scripting. What emerged was a fragmented landscape of single-purpose blockchains, each trying to solve one problem at a time. This fragmentation highlighted a deeper inefficiency. Every new idea required a new chain, a new token, new security assumptions, and a new network effect from scratch. Innovation was slow, expensive, and scattered. The ecosystem was expanding, but without cohesion. This is where the core insight behind Ethereum took shape. Vitalik Buterin, who was deeply involved in the early Bitcoin community and had a strong understanding of protocol design, recognized that the problem wasn't Bitcoin's limitations themselves. The problem was that there was no general-purpose platform for experimentation. Instead of building a new blockchain for every idea, why not build a single blockchain capable of running any application? That idea sounds obvious now, but at the time it was radical. It meant rethinking what a blockchain was for. Bitcoin treated the blockchain as a ledger, a record of ownership. Ethereum would treat the blockchain as a global execution environment. This distinction is critical. Bitcoin answers the question, who owns what? Ethereum answers the question, what should happen next? And that difference explains almost every design choice that followed. At the center of Ethereum's creation is Vitalik Buterin, but it's important to understand him not as a lone genius figure, but as a product of the early Bitcoin era itself. Vitalik entered the crypto space as a teenager, drawn not by speculation, but by ideas. He became deeply involved in the Bitcoin community in its formative years, writing technical articles, helping to explain the protocol, and co-founding Bitcoin magazine. Through that work, he gained an unusually broad view of the ecosystem at a very early stage. He wasn't just looking at Bitcoin as money. He was watching how developers were trying to extend it, how altcoins were emerging to patch perceived limitations, and how innovation was fragmenting across dozens of small, isolated experiments. What set Vitalik apart was not that he rejected Bitcoin's design, but that he fully understood why it was designed the way it was, and what that design deliberately excluded. He recognized that Bitcoin's conservatism was necessary for sound money, but restrictive for experimentation. Ethereum emerged from that observation. Vitalik's proposal wasn't to replace Bitcoin or fix it. but to create a separate system with a different purpose, a blockchain optimized for programmability rather than monetary rigidity. Importantly, Vitalik never presented Ethereum as immutable or finished. From the beginning, he viewed it as an evolving protocol, something closer to open infrastructure than a static asset. That mindset shaped Ethereum's culture, its willingness to upgrade, and its tolerance for complexity. It also explains many of the trade-offs Ethereum accepted that Bitcoin would never consider. Vitalik's role then wasn't just technical. He acted as a bridge between Bitcoin's first principles and crypto's second phase, translating the lessons of decentralized money into a broader vision of decentralized systems. Ethereum reflects that origin. Intellectually ambitious, structurally flexible, and unapologetically experimental. Ethereum's white paper, published in 2013, outlined a blockchain with a built-in programming language that allowed developers to deploy smart contracts, self-executing code that runs exactly as written, without intermediaries. Instead of relying on trusted third parties to enforce agreements, Ethereum would allow code itself to become the arbiter. To support this vision, Ethereum made several fundamental design decisions that set it apart from Bitcoin. It adopted an account-based model rather than Bitcoin's UTXO model, making it easier to track balances and manage application state. It introduced the Ethereum virtual machine, a decentralized computer that executes code consistently across thousands of nodes. And it implemented gas fees to price computation, preventing abuse and allocating scarce network resources. These choices made Ethereum far more flexible than Bitcoin, but also more complex. Where Bitcoin optimized for certainty and immutability, Ethereum optimized for adaptability. That adaptability unlocked an entirely new category of use cases. Developers could now build decentralized exchanges, lending platforms, tokenized assets, governance systems, and eventually entire digital economies on top of a single shared base layer. This is why Ethereum didn't just add features to crypto. It changed the direction of the entire space. But it's crucial to understand that Ethereum could not have existed before Bitcoin. Without Bitcoin, Ethereum would have had no foundation. There would have been no proof that decentralized networks could secure value. No mining infrastructure, no exchanges, no wallets, no user trust, no social legitimacy. Bitcoin didn't just create technology. It created belief. Ethereum is a second-order innovation. It builds on Bitcoin's success rather than replacing it. This also explains why Ethereum took risks Bitcoin never would. Bitcoin's role as digital money requires stability above all else. Changes must be slow, conservative, and minimal. Ethereum, by contrast, was designed to evolve. It hard-forked after the DAO exploit. It upgraded repeatedly. It eventually transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake. One of the most defining moments in Ethereum's history came with the DAO hard fork in 2016, an event that still shapes how the network is understood today. The DAO was an early decentralized investment fund built on Ethereum, designed to let users pool capital and vote on how it was allocated using smart contracts rather than managers. It quickly attracted enormous interest and, at the time, held a significant share of all Ether in circulation. But the code contained a vulnerability. An attacker exploited that flaw and siphoned off a large portion of the funds, not by breaking the rules of the system, but by using the code exactly as written. This created a crisis that went far beyond money. The Ethereum community was forced to confront a fundamental question. If a blockchain executes code as written, even when the outcome is clearly unjust or destructive, should the system intervene? The hard fork was the answer the majority chose. By altering the blockchain's history to return the stolen funds, Ethereum effectively rewound the exploit and restored balances, prioritizing the intent of the system over strict immutability. The fork was controversial because it broke one of the core assumptions many people associated with blockchains, that the ledger is final and unchangeable. Not everyone agreed with the decision. A minority continued running the original chain, which became known as Ethereum Classic, while the forked chain retained the Ethereum name and most of the ecosystem. What followed was a clear divergence in philosophy. Ethereum accepted that governance, coordination, and human judgment would sometimes play a role in extraordinary circumstances. The network survived, grew, and attracted developers at an accelerating pace. The DAO fork didn't weaken Ethereum, it defined it. It established Ethereum as a system willing to evolve, take responsibility, and prioritize usability and resilience over absolute rigidity. A choice that would influence every major upgrade that came after. These decisions were controversial, but they were consistent with Ethereum's mission. Infrastructure must adapt. Applications must change. Systems designed for experimentation cannot be frozen in time. This philosophical split still defines crypto today. Bitcoin prioritizes immutability and monetary discipline. Ethereum prioritizes flexibility and programmability. Neither approach is inherently superior. They serve different roles. Bitcoin functions as a settlement layer, digital gold, a base asset, a reference point for value. Ethereum operates above that layer, enabling logic, coordination, and application-level complexity. One secures value. The other enables activity. This is why Ethereum never replaced Bitcoin, despite early predictions. Instead, the two formed a layered relationship. Bitcoin established trust. Ethereum extended capability. Over time, Ethereum's influence spread beyond its own ecosystem. Competing chains adopted Ethereum-compatible virtual machines. Token standards like ERC-20 became industry defaults. The idea that blockchains could host complex economic systems became mainstream. Stablecoins, decentralized finance, NFTs, DAOs, and Layer 2 scaling networks all trace their roots back to Ethereum's core innovation, programmable trust. Today, Ethereum is best understood not as a competitor to Bitcoin, but as an expansion of what blockchains can do. It exists because Bitcoin proved decentralization was viable. It thrives because it took a different set of risks. Had Ethereum launched first, it likely would have failed. The world was not ready to trust programmable money before it trusted money itself. Bitcoin taught the world that decentralized systems could be secure. Ethereum taught the world how to build on that security. That sequence matters. Ethereum was not an accident. It was a response, not to Bitcoin's failure, but to its success. And that is why Ethereum came after Bitcoin. So, where does Ethereum ultimately end up? The most honest answer is that it doesn't end up as a single finished product, because Ethereum was never designed to be finished. Unlike Bitcoin, which aims to change as little as possible over time, Ethereum was built as evolving infrastructure, a base layer that adapts as technology, use cases, and economic realities change. In the future, Ethereum is unlikely to be judged by whether it is the fastest or the cheapest, but by whether it remains the coordination layer that other systems choose to build on. Its long-term role looks less like a standalone product and more like a settlement and execution layer sitting beneath applications, Layer 2 networks, and real-world financial systems that most users never interact with directly. If Bitcoin is digital money that people trust precisely because it rarely changes, Ethereum is programmable infrastructure that people use precisely because it can. That distinction matters. Ethereum's success won't come from replacing Bitcoin, competing with it, or outperforming it in monetary terms. It will come from continuing to do what Bitcoin never set out to do: enable complex economic activity without central control. If it succeeds, Ethereum fades into the background, not because it failed, but because it worked. Like the internet itself, the most successful outcome is one where the technology becomes invisible, embedded, and taken for granted. And if history is any guide, Ethereum's future will be defined not by one final destination, but by its ability to remain useful as the world around it changes. That, ultimately, is what it was built for. And this is usually the point where people ask the uncomfortable but inevitable question: do we ever see Ethereum at numbers like $50,000? It's a headline that grabs attention because it sounds extreme, but the honest answer depends entirely on how you frame it. If you're asking whether Ethereum simply trades up to $50,000 on speculation alone, detached from usage, infrastructure, and economic reality, then the answer is probably no. Not in any sustainable or meaningful way. But if you're asking whether Ethereum could reach that kind of valuation as the settlement and execution layer for a much larger on-chain economy, then the question changes. A 50,000 Ether implies a vastly bigger role. Trillions of dollars settled through Layer 2 networks, stablecoins operating at global scale, institutions using Ethereum-based infrastructure in the background, and Ethereum itself acting as scarce productive collateral rather than a pure utility token. In that world, price becomes a reflection of economic gravity, not excitement. It's also worth remembering that Ethereum doesn't need to reach round numbers to succeed. Its long-term importance isn't defined by whether it hits $5,000, $15,000, or $50,000, but by whether activity continues to concentrate around it. If Ethereum remains the place where value moves, contracts settle, and systems coordinate, higher prices become a consequence, not the objective. So yes, $50,000 is possible in theory, but only in a future where Ethereum has already won something far more important than a price target, and that's relevance. Drop your thoughts in the comments, follow for more deep dives like this, and we will see you at the top.